So, I understand that this is a non-Sonic video, and I should have footage from the game at least somewhat related to the Wild Robot, but if you think about it, Sonic Battle is pretty similar to the Wild Robot, because it's about a robot that gets washed ashore. And that's kind of it. You could compare some of the more thematic elements, like how both of the stories have themes of like sticking to what you were built to do and your programming and all that. But the real reason I chose Sonic Battle is because I just wanted to get to talking about this movie because I think it's really good, and Sonic Battle have robot in it. Sonic Battle, good choice. So how about we get to talking about the Wild Robot now? Sound good? Now, this is a movie that my sister really wanted to see. It's not the type of movie that I would normally watch, but I joined in anyway, and I gotta say, it's a really good movie, probably one of my favorites now. But in finding out what makes this movie so good, we should probably first examine what the movie has to say. And I noticed many themes throughout this movie that all weave together in clever ways. Because this movie's about a robot, right? And robots are kind of an out with the old, in with the new type of thing. Robots are the future. Robots are replacing everything. All that kind of stuff. And throughout the movie, there's a subtle theme of like moving on, which fits perfectly with this robot premise. And I don't just mean moving on like moving on after someone died or something like that, because this is used in many ways. Like I already said about the whole robot thing and how it's moving on into the future and leaving the past behind. But also, throughout the movie, Roz, the main protagonist, keeps thinking that she should go back to where she was made. But she later learns to adapt to where she is and move on into the future. There's also Bright Bill, the duck, and Roz grows an attachment to Bright Bill and becomes the mother figure for him, and later he has to migrate and he has to leave Roz behind. And that's another thing with the whole moving on. She has to accept that Bright Bill needs to go away, and that also ties in with the whole parenting theme, because I mentioned already that Roz is like the mother figure to Bright Bill, and yeah, that comes across in many ways throughout the movie. Roz learning to accept that Bright Bill has to migrate is like parents needing to accept that their child is going to grow up. And I'm not a parent, so I'm probably missing a lot of other comparisons, but I think that I noticed a good bit of details. Another thing that I liked about this whole parenting theme in the movie is that, yeah, it doesn't like hide the fact that parenting's a lot of work, but it also shows the payoff of this work. It's not trying to scare people away from parenting, because parenting is a beautiful thing, and getting to see your child grow is a beautiful thing. And a lot of people are missing out on this beauty because they think it's gonna be too much work. But now let's talk about what actually happens in the movie, because this is where I think the flaws kind of shine, but not till the very end, don't worry, I still really like these parts. So basically, this robot, Rosm179 or whatever, I can't remember the numbers, but she gets lost on this island with like a whole unit of robots. And basically, her whole robot series is designed to help out people. So naturally, being on an island with a bunch of animals, she tries to help out the animals in their daily tasks. But because she's so used to helping out people, and she's not meant to be doing this with these animals, these wild animals, she fails miserably, and the animals hate her. So she naturally assumes that she just doesn't belong, and she should go back to the lab where she was made. She's gotta get the return transmitter or something. I can't remember what it was called. But anyway, she gets into a little bit of kerfuffle with this fox, and he's like trying to steal the return transmitter for whatever reason. I mean, I guess Fox is just like stealing things, but I don't know. I think it could have been explained a little better. And during this kerfuffle, she finds like an egg of a baby goose, and this goose takes a liking to her. So she's gotta parent the goose now, and because she's a robot, she views this as just one of her tasks. She doesn't get attached to Brightbill or anything. She just goes along with doing the essentials, feeding him, getting him to fly, that kind of stuff. Oh, and the fox from earlier also helps her a little bit. And when she's making a shelter, the goose wants to help her, and she sees him as a hindrance to the efficiency of getting the shelter done. But sometimes you gotta make compromises for your child, so she lets him help anyway. This is the first instance of her growing and changing and rewriting her programming, as she likes to put it. After the shelter's done, she needs to give the goose a name, and she tries giving it a name of just numbers, but the fox boy, whose name is actually Fink, I forgot to mention that, says that that's lame, and she has to like wrap her head around it at first, but eventually she comes up with the name Brightbill, and that's his name now. This is the beginning of Roz's major character arc throughout the story, so this is the most important part of it to mention. But she does keep growing throughout the story. In the future, when Brightbill's older, he can't make any friends because he was raised by a robot, so naturally the robot is gonna teach him to act like a robot, and it feels like it's trying to be like an autism kind of thing, but like they kind of just like drop it and he starts like talking like a normal person eventually. So I don't know, maybe that was like an early concept they had and they decided to drop it, but I think it's a cool idea and I would have loved to see more of it. Now, because of this, Brightbill thinks the fact that he can't make any friends is all Roz's fault, so he becomes, like, angry. And this is one of the parts of the story that I think could be taken out and nothing would have really been affected, because, like, the conflict is, like, resolved, like, really close after. It doesn't really mean that much. I think with a little bit of tweaking, you could have made it contribute to the plot a little more. I just watched Ratatouille, and in that movie, there was a really good part where the main characters broke up, and it didn't feel forced. But in this movie, it kind of just feels like it was in there because it's like a thing that movies do, and it's like dramatic, and I feel like you didn't really need it. Anyway, back to the movie. Roz helps Brightbill, and then Brightbill starts migrating, and while he's gone, Roz gets an encounter with this other robot, and the robot is telling her that, like, you shouldn't rewrite your programming, we gotta get you back to return, but since the robot is kind of beat up, it just turns off. And I can see an argument for how you wouldn't need this in the movie either, but I feel like this contributes a little more because it's kind of the other side of Roz. The character doesn't really do that much, but what it does do is pretty meaningful, so I think this character's inclusion is fine. And after this moment in the movie, I feel like it goes downhill a little bit. Not too much, I still think this part is good, but it's kinda weird The Wild Robot is an adaptation of the first 2 Wild Robot books, and getting to this point in the movie, you can kind of tell, even though I haven't read the books, you can kind of tell that this is the point where it starts to get into the second book. So it kind of just turns into like a mess of like Bright Bill and all of his stuff and like how he's growing, and it also starts to retread parts from the earlier movie. And because of this, I'm not going to really be talking about this part in detail. Instead, we'll just skip into the later movie, because there's like a lot of parts at the end where I think the movie's gonna end and it just doesn't. And again, I think this is due to like how it's an adaptation of the first and second book, so they gotta include things from both. But that's why I say that this gets really messy towards the end. And I think the start of this movie is actually its highest point. And it's a shame that I have to say that, because with movies, usually you want it to get better towards the end and like have it ramp up. And this movie does do that, but I think the things that it tries to do end up ultimately failing. For example, there's this new villain lady who I can't even remember her name, but she's like a squid and she's trying to take Roz back. She like is a robot for the place where Roz was originally built. And I'm like, you don't need this character in there. She doesn't really do anything. She doesn't really do that much. It's just because, like, oh, we need a final climactic villain. And it's like, no, you don't. There are tons of movies that don't have villains, and they still make for good conflict and good character development and storytelling. So yeah, this is why I think the movie would have been better without this squid lady. I don't know if this squid lady was in the books, but it feels to me like she wasn't, or at least wasn't in the first book. However, there is a part of this movie that I do really like that is at the end. At the end, Roz and Fink have to like evacuate all of the animals into like a shelter. And remember how I said there was like a theme of like altering your programming in this movie? Because I think this part brings that to a nice closure. Basically, when all of the animals are in this shelter, they are fighting. They're doing what they would do in the wild. They're following their programming. But in order to survive, they need to get along. So that's a nice little thing that I think ties into the rest of the story nicely. Another thing I'd like to bring up that isn't really related to the plot of the movie, but I thought it was cool. In this movie, as the story progresses, Roz slowly gets more watercolor, like storybook-esque textures, whereas at the start, it's all CGI. This is showing that she's learning to blend in more and be a part of this new society that she's a part of. Isn't that nice? And one last thing I'd like to talk about is that the Bible Insights India people made this thing on why the wild robot points to Jesus. And I think there are some interesting things about it, but I would say that I don't think this was the intention that the people writing this movie had when they made it. It talks about how Roz was called the monster and everything, just like Jesus was looked down upon, and how Roz's ultimate sacrifice is just like Jesus's sacrifice. It also talks about how we are Fink, because we are influenced to grow and change through Jesus or Roz. But I do see a flaw in this argument, because It isn't just Fink that's being influenced by Roz. Roz herself also goes through a major character arc throughout the story. It's literally the focus of this whole movie. And Jesus didn't really go through any major character changes. He influenced other people, but he himself wasn't really influenced that much. This is why I don't really think this is a very good comparison. It's got some interesting elements, but I think there are much better comparisons in media that you could make to Jesus. Anyway, that's all for this video on the Wild Roboto. Thanks for viewing, and I'll see you around.